When people are trying to make interesting D&D characters, they often get caught in this paralysis of where do I start? How do I start? What on God's green earth does alignment actually mean? And where am I going with this? How much backstory should I write? And all of these can be really overwhelming thoughts. So with this video, I kind of want to go through how I as a DM sit down with my players and kind of coach them through making a character. And if you're a player, feel free to take down a pen and pencil and actually go through the steps with me as I go through them in this book. And as a DM, feel free to reference your players to this video so that they can kind of walk through and pause as they need. So the D&D handbook has an overwhelming amount of information. And it starts you right off with having to know what class you want to actually play before you can build a character. And I don't think that's the best place to start. Where I would recommend you start is just grab out 4 dice right now and just roll them. End up grabbing out your stats first and look at those stats however you want to do it. If you want to do a point buy, feel free to do a point buy. But actually start kind of having the fun of rolling the dice. I mean, as a D&D player, almost all of us love that sound, and it can be a nice, fun way to get this process started. And write the numbers down on the page. Let's break up that blank page. I know a lot of artists follow this philosophy where a blank page can leave you completely lost. So the first step is just to put a line right down on it. And I agree with this statement. So right now, just write down all of those stats and then start this video back up. All right, now that you have your stats, the next step really is combat. Combat is the part of D&D that can be the most boring, so you want to make sure your character is fun and something you enjoy fighting with. So if you're lost on what class you want to do or where you want to begin for your actual mentality behind how you're fighting, let's go through some questions and kind of write down the answers of them, and then you can kind of go from there. Do you want your character to be melee or ranged? Are you looking for them to be martial character or magical? What are your favorite types of weapons or magic to use as this character? Does this character rush in head first, or are they going to stay back more and observe and fight from afar? Once you have these questions answered, you can kind of start to mold what class you actually want to run. Whether you're going to go fully caster, fully melee, or a little mix of both, it really just depends on what you want to do. Martial classes and magical classes all have very specific identities, and you can kind of pick and choose based on what you want to do. So for example, I'm going to go through how I answered these questions for a character I made named Jeevan. So I wanted Jeevan to be a melee caster, which is already going to mix in some problems. His favorite type of magic that he uses is lightning, and he loves to rush in head first and fight up close, kind of like a martial character would, but he's going to be a full magic caster. Now, if you know much about casters in D&D, you're probably doing what I was doing, where I go, yeah, this isn't going to work. And from there, it's kind of a simple answer. What I had to do to actually make this character operate is I actually just sat down and I kind of pondered on it. I was making it way harder than it needed to be. If you want a melee caster, you just kind of have to pump their deck so that they have a higher armor class and they can kind of dodge a little bit easier and get out of the way. And the rest will kind of develop with time. With him being a lightning caster, and I wanted him to be able to do subtle casting and sneakily weave in spells, I was starting to lean towards sorcerer so that I could have meta magic, and I ended up going with a Tempest sorcerer because of the fact that the Tempest one lets me bounce away if I get into trouble whenever I cast a spell. I thought that this was kind of the best route for him, but if you kind of see, I started out with my core idea of what I wanted to do. I wanted him to be melee, I wanted him to be a full caster, but I also wanted him to be able to get out and escape and survive. So then I started building my build around how could I disengage after I attack. And that's really where you kind of need to start as a D&D player, is start back from the beginning. Start with how you're going to fight and then go from there. Now comes the really fun part for most of us. Let's get into the backstory. My first step whenever I'm doing a backstory for a character is actually to start out with a conversation with either my players or my DM, depending on which role I'm in. I like to sit down and kind of ask my DMs, what's the surrounding area like? So for the campaign I'm going to be in for Jeevan, he is actually in an area where magic is heavily looked down upon. It's almost not allowed at all. So he's going to be a character that's in hiding. And with his backstory and him being a melee fighter, I actually ended up taking an unarmed combat feat so that I could kind of have him up close and bruisery and fighting with his hands without kind of having issues. And my whole reason for why I did this was so that he could pretend to be a martial character so that he didn't get murdered in the area that he's in. And I think that that's an important thing to recognize, is the area is going to shape your character. And as you begin to keep going forward, you need to kind of talk to your DM and figure out, what are the surrounding areas like? Are you from a faraway area? And if you are, what does your DM think should be in the story? And then you use the story and the surrounding area to actually shape how your character interacts with the world. And I think that that's the better way to do it, where you can get a really interesting character that's going to be more fun to actually write and play into the story, because you're ingrained in what is around you then. Now, I can't really talk about backstory and background without talking about alignment. Alignment's one of those ones where all of us as DMs go, I don't really like this, because the player's handbook only gives us one sentence for every single alignment, and that's just way too little. The best way that you can go about actually doing alignment is to kind of toss out those preconceived sentences that they give you and kind of think about it for yourself. I know a lot of people use an alternative like the Magic Color Pie, and I think that's a great option. It's just not my favorite. So I ended up actually writing a full article on how I break down alignment and what I think characters align with for DMs to give to their players and kind of inspire them. That's going to be over on my Patreon for those who want to go check it out. That being said, a brief summation of it is, ask yourself what the motivation of your player is, like you as a player is. If your motivation is to cause chaos and harm people and annoy them and bother them and constantly cause problems, then you're going to be a chaotic evil character. Whereas, like, somebody, I know we talk about them a lot in D&D, is murder hobos, is if you're just going around killing everything indiscriminately just for the fun of it, that's much more of a chaotic neutral character, because they don't really care about anything. And so those are kind of two examples I'm going to use on the negative side of the spectrum. But think about kind of what your character is thinking as they're going through their actions before you decide your alignment. Now, that's kind of the whole process I go through, breaking into this inspirational mindset in order to actually build an interesting character. If you have any questions or want anything that you think I didn't cover really well in this video, make sure you leave a comment down below and I'll respond to it and kind of give people a little more insight into what I think and what I do. And I'm more than happy to help people create characters.